Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the new normal. It's me, Tony Sindelar, instructional designer and teaching consultant, here again to talk about what does teaching look like in the new normal, this era as we are all dealing with self-isolation and social distancing and teaching online, something none of us, or very few of us at least, had signed up for. So for this third episode, I wanted to go a little bit beyond my area of expertise, which meant I needed to pull in a guest. So I'd like to welcome to the show. That feels weird to say, but I guess that's what it is. Welcome to the show. My very first guest, Luella Ben, the MGH-IHP's Associate Director for Accessibility Resources. And hi, welcome, Luella. Thanks for being the first guest ever.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for inviting me today.
So, Luella, I felt like the first thing before I kind of like dive into kind of my questions and what I want to chat with you about is just to like ask, like, how are you doing? I feel like that's where all of my conversations with everybody start right now is like, are you okay? Is everybody okay? Or how are you? So.
Yeah, I'm doing as well as I think can be expected. I'm currently working from home, and I have a roommate who is off of work but not working. So I'm sure other people can relate to that type of challenge. But other than that, as Alex was fond of saying in the meeting that we had a couple weeks ago, it's been business as unusual.
Cool. Well, I hope it continues to go okay. It feels like, I don't know, I'm working from home. I didn't think would be a big deal, but it's like, it's hard to find the routine. And I don't know, I think cabin fever is setting in early. So the big thing I wanted to chat about with you about, my audience as an instructional designer, I work with faculty, and that's who I hear from. And it is pretty unusual that I have, aside from the course I teach as an adjunct, I don't get to see or hear from students very much. So I was just curious, like, if there's anything you could share about what you're kind of seeing or hearing from students, maybe in general, or the students that you support in particular through the Accessibility Resources Office.
Yeah, sure. So I think in general, when I think about students, I have the most contact with our OSAS GAs, who are still, some of them are able to have some remote hours and are working remotely. So I'm hearing from them that they're grateful for anything that we can really do to support them to have some structure and routine. A lot of them, especially those who are supposed to be out on mainly practicums, that have either been postponed or outright canceled, are really looking for ways to stay connected and ways to have some kind of routine in their lives. The ones who are enrolled in classes and the class structure are doing their best to adapt to that, are mostly grateful for any kind of flexibility because, again, I think similar to staff, similar to faculty, similar to everybody, some of them have newly imposed childcare challenges at home, are working from their homes with other people who are working from home or not working from home. So, facing a lot of the same challenges that we're facing. And directly for students who are registered with my office, the biggest thing that I'm hearing from them is just anxiety. They want to be sure that they're still going to be able to access their accommodations, questions about how things might be in place, and just really looking to get that check-in and reassurance that we're still going to be here to support them.
Yeah. And, that concern from students that their accommodations are going to follow them into these new ways of teaching and learning that we're kind of all sifting through and all falling out are very real concerns. And obviously they should, right? I mean, they need to. But that was one of the things I was interested in talking to you. Accessibility and universal design are topics I care a lot about. I'm not an expert the same way you are about those topics, but I'm just kind of curious in terms of if you have any thoughts on why it's, I don't know if this is a dumb question, but I know it's important to be thinking about these right now. We're all moving to online. Online has the potential to be more accessible and use these universal design techniques if we are thoughtful, intentional about them. But why are they extra important? What should, if I'm a faculty member, why do I need to be thinking about that right now?
Well, I just think about as a faculty member or as a person living in the world, the ways in your life that you might use things that were initially designed for as universal design for people who had disabilities. Text messaging was originally designed for deaf people to be able to make phone calls, and think about the way it works in our life right now. Think about if you when you're using your cell phone, you zoom in on that screen to increase the font size so that you can see most easily. You know, these are all things that originally were put into place to support people who had disabilities, and who that make all of our lives easier. So when we think about ways that we could make something more accessible for a student with a disability, we're also thinking about ways that we can make it more accessible for everybody,
Mm-hmm.
and the vice versa. If we're thinking about ways that we can make our design more accessible to everybody, that's going to benefit students with disabilities.
Yeah. And that's, for some faculty who are watching or listening to this, if you haven't read up on universal design for learning, if that's not a phrase that's, familiar to you, and, some people kind of use that interchangeably with accessibility, but they are different concepts. The big thing about universal design for learning, which is overlaps with a lot of instructional design methodologies, is just this idea of like, how do you make it so that as many different types of learners or students with different preferences can access your materials, can show that they are learning, and kind of progress through what you're doing. And that, I think that can be challenging for some people in general, and especially right now as we're in this kind of panic mode where maybe there is this, like, I need to converge onto, like, there is only one path through my material right now. And that is hard if, in the past, the flexibility of paths has been really helpful to your learners. So I guess, I wanted to see if you had any kind of thoughts on advice for faculty at the Institute or elsewhere. I know you've put together some guidelines that I think are or will be circulating to faculty soon. So hopefully people will take advantage of those. But anything that you wanted to highlight from that in terms of what would kind of make what just needs to happen, or what would make a big difference in the lives of their students that faculty could be thinking about right now, Luella?
Yeah, sure. So I sent out last week, I sent out a set of guidelines to students about kind of, I think it was the 5 or 6 most commonly utilized accommodations here at the IHP. And when I sent that out, all of the heads of the various programs, whatever that's called in your program, because they're different across the board, received a copy of that as well. And I know some of them have been sharing. This was also shared with the provost office, the assistant provost office, and asked to distribute to faculty. I'm not always precisely sure on the mechanisms behind how that happens. But I think the biggest things is that a lot of this is actually going to look very similar or the same. So if you regularly give your tests in D2L and you've had students in the past who've had extended time, you're familiar with the mechanism for how to set extended time for students who are testing in D2L. Students who get flexibility accommodations, that's going to look largely the same, how that's negotiated either for assignments. And there have been a lot of flex agreements that have come out in the past semester where we've really outlined that for students. I would encourage all faculty to just kind of consider whether in this time it makes sense for there to be more flexibility. I know a lot of our staff are very flexible, but again, thinking about your own lives and all of the different demands that are going on you right now, doesn't make sense to build in some more of that. I think some of the accommodations, things like reduced distraction environment, that is clearly going to be on students to figure out how to implement that for themselves. So there are some things where we provide environmentally and where we're kind of out of that equation now. I'm working with some students to problem solve some creative ways that they can do that if they're in environments that are more challenging. I think one of the biggest differences that we're going to see is, for me on my end, happening kind of with note-taking and different things that we're providing to students. So I know Tony did a whole video on synchronous versus asynchronous course design, but I do manage a small group of note takers for students. And so for those of you who are posting videos, who are holding live class sessions, I've reached out to all of the note takers and the students who receive notes and said that for those types of learning activities that I would still be expecting them to take notes and providing. If you go to a more asynchronous model, then note taking may not be necessary. And that's, I think about the fact that I have also, prior to all of this happening, worked with some of our online and distance learning students who are enrolled in the undergraduate electives or prerequisites rather. And so the way that those courses are designed by and large is asynchronous, and through students are asked to do readings and then have a certain amount of time to post some responses. And then sometimes there are additional assignments as well. So that type of a thing, obviously where all of the assignments are in writing and there's no lecture series to take notes on. But, you know, think about whether any of your learning could go to that model. The benefit of that is that it does provide a lot of flexibility for students for when they can respond. If you look at the guidelines that I provided, that doesn't mean that students get unending, open-ended time to do the responses, because those responses are really considered class participation, and really impact the amount of learning that that student and other students who are able to respond to those messages are getting out of the class.
Yeah. I think that, you know,
So
the asynchronous versus synchronous thing is a big challenge that I think people are figuring out, and like maybe we're only a week into it, and so we're not very far with figuring it out. But it's hard, and I think you know, my experience in working with people who doing online teaching and learning is that traditional online classes have been very asynchronous as a flexibility, not necessarily as a universal design for learning principle, but just as a, like, you're a working professional and you have a complicated job schedule and other things in your life, and you're going to fit in this course when you can. And I think the challenging thing we are dealing with right now is everybody who was asked to move their courses, their teaching online in a matter of days. Synchronous has seemed like the default or the obvious way to do it, and Zoom has been the kind of de facto tool. So it's like, well, my class met for 3 hours on a Monday, so now it meets for 3 hours on a Monday at the same time and plays via Zoom. And, you know, I mean, I'm trying not to be too critical of people who are doing the best they can in really, really rough situations, but the instructional designer in me, which is a lot of me, does kind of think about, like, well, think about what is that in that 3 hours needs to be in that 3 hours that you're doing face-to-face virtually with students, or that they're doing interacting with each other, and what could you potentially move to asynchronous that they are working on sometime that week. Because I just think that you're not, like, the instinct to move your 3 hour session from you know, in the classroom to virtual, it was not a bad instinct, but you're not going to get the same outcomes that you would have, right? The
I
learning
think
to,
that's right.
yeah,
I think that maybe looking to move to a mix of, as we all adjust to the new reality,
yeah,
to move to a mix of maybe a shortened lecture, or some shortened online activities, and then some of the more asynchronous. And I totally understand the instinct that it definitely feels and seems easiest up front to just move all of that to doing video.
yeah,
In the long run, I think both for faculty and for students, that if they start experimenting with other ways that they may find, um, that ultimately the workload is lessened
yeah,
by looking at other ways. It might be a little bit more work on the front end, but again, no criticism for faculty who are doing that,
yeah.
because this is a brave new world for all of us, right?
Yeah, we're 1 week into it. You know, you can only do what you can. But I guess that is one of my big kind of things for today's video, is like, think about what you could be doing differently, and, like, you know, obviously pace yourself, and maybe you are doing as much as you possibly can, and you don't have any time and energy for experimentation, and, like, you know, that's fine. Like, we're glad that you're here. We're glad that you're hopefully healthy and doing what you can. But for other folks, if you've got anything, like, think about, could you scale back that 3 hours, and, like, maybe that will help you. Maybe you, like, you know, maybe the 3 hours is like, maybe that's an exhausting marathon for you. And if there's stuff that you could take and say, like, well, hey, I need you as a student to work on this activity asynchronously, individually, or with a small group of students sometime this week, but we don't have to do it in this 3 hours. And our 3 hours could be 2 hours or 2.5 hours or something else, just because I think that 3 hours, you know, people are so anxious and so frenzied, and so, you know, going from one thing, you are not getting the 3 hours. You're not getting 3 hours of learning out of 3 hours, no matter what you do. And so maybe it's the hard truth that we just need to stop pretending we're getting that, and look at maybe the asynchronous would be a way to kind of help students out, because that 3 hours is hard. Sitting in a Zoom meeting for 3 hours is rough, and finding that 3 hours in the day, everyone's lives are turned upside down. It's not like they have a classroom in their house that they're sitting in. We're all dealing with weird work from home situations, and students are very likely to have family and roommates around, and finding 3 hours of quiet is not trivial.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
yeah.
and personally, I would find it challenging to videotape myself for 3 hours.
Hmm.
So maybe that's just my personal feelings
Yeah.
on that. So.
Yeah. So,
And then my last thing is just like reach out. I'm here, I'm working my regular hours,
yeah.
it might be from the comfort of my home office, which is a corner of my bedroom. But I have been emailing with faculty, with students. I've had Zoom meetings with faculty and with students. So let me know what works for you as
Mhm.
far as, whether you'd rather handle something over email or schedule a quick phone call, or have a Zoom chat. And I'm happy to figure out ways that we can come together to figure it out together.
Yeah. So again, faculty, thanks for watching or listening. I know this stuff is not easy, but hopefully this will give you some ideas for thinking about what your online instruction is going to look like and how we can help our students through these challenging times, through this new normal. Um, but again, flexibility is the big word. So whatever you can do to be flexible with those assignments, whatever you can to be flexible with those synchronous sessions, a little bit of flexibility goes a long way. And I know for people who teach the big classes, flexibility is, I guess, more, for lack of a better word, more expensive than others. And, flexibility is going to look like different things in different places based on the constraints. But I encourage all of you, think about what are the things you could do that could give students a little bit of flexibility, because they will appreciate it, and it will go a long way with them. So, Luella, thanks for being my first guest here on the New Normal and sharing your expertise. I hope faculty found this interesting and useful for them as they're thinking about their teaching.
Thanks, Tony.
Bye.